If you go to any one of my videos, any one of my deck profiles or live duels, and look at a card being placed on the video, more often than not, it's in its highest rarity. So one would probably look at TheCaliEffect. What do you know about budget options? What do you know about budget decks? You've come from a privileged life. You've always had it easy. Boy, you couldn't be more far from wrong. I'm from Watts, California. I was born during the Watts riots. I grew up in East LA. I've lived in homeless shelters, on the streets, shacks, anywhere you can name it. And while I'm not saying that you guys' situation is identical to my lifestyle where I grew up at, I can tell you guys I understand what it's like to be able to budget. Even still to this day, we budget. And while we make YOLO swag, that's just because we always got the sauce, ladies and gentlemen. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys some of the best decks on a budget. Why? Well, just because they're a budget deck doesn't mean that they're not good. And I understand that the people that are on a budget still want to play Yu-Gi-Oh! To the best of their ability. I'm TheCaliEffect, and if you guys want to see more videos like this, they're going to destroy that subscribe button. But more importantly, go hit that notification bell because, well, we just too strong. Also want to give a special thanks to every single one of my Patreons. Without you guys, videos like this would not be possible. And if you want to know more about the TheCaliEffect King of Games, then, well, my Instagram is probably a good place to start. I post non-Yu-Gi-Oh! Stuff on there all the time. Actually, don't even talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! When we're there. It's just me, you, and anybody else that wants to listen. Without further ado, I present to you the best budget decks for this May 2019 format. Now, I'm going to tell you guys right off the bat, I'm not like those other Yu-Gi-Oh! Channels. I'm not going to sell you some story about how this deck is very, very cheap and still is extraordinarily competitive. We're on a budget here, well, I understand, but we also have to make a little bit of compromise. I think that around $200 is a really good starting point to have a competitive deck. This is normally including your main board, your extra deck, and your sideboard all in total. $200 may seem steep to some of you guys, which means we'll have to improvise just a little bit. But I think if you have $200, you can get just about any great competitive deck that can win you a high-level event and still have it for quite some time. Think of it as a startup investment. The first strategy that comes to mind when it comes to budget and competitive is probably one of my favorite strategies that has been introduced inside of the Link format. Crusader is really good. The thing that I like best about it for budget players is that almost every single card in the main deck can be common. That's right, even Ash Blossoms and Joyous Springs, if you guys so decide to play them or have the access to play them, are common, meaning that it's probably the cheapest deck on this list. I want to say that you can get this deck for around $70 max-ish, and the most expensive card being Saryuja Skull Dread if you decide to go that route in playing it. Now, there are quite a few ways to play Crusader. You can play a pure build with Kaijus, which is essentially really cheap. The Kaijus are maybe about $3 or $4 each, depending on which ones that you get. And Kyoto Waterfront is a card that everybody should have because it does come common as well. The next best thing about this is that you can play a Guard Dragon version, and again, the only expensive card off the top of my head that comes to mind is Saryuja Skull Dread, sitting at roughly $20 to $30 last time I checked. Other than that, Crusader is a cheap, effective strategy. Being able to OTK the opponent or setting up some really powerful boards, you can see this have some local level success. And possibly, if you're good enough, heck, you can take this deck to regionals. Dual Power actually really helped this deck as Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend was a $50 card. But now, ever since its reprint, you can get the card for as little as 50 cents. Improvise, ladies and gentlemen. Crusaders could be your option when it comes to budget utility. The next deck that comes to mind is almost cheaper until you have to get some of those hard to find, relatively somewhat expensive cards. Zombies are still really good. You can buy 3 of the zombie structure deck and get almost every single thing you need for about $30 before tax. The next thing that you need to find is Super Polymerization, which could be as low as 7 each. Tack on an additional $15 because I think they sit around $7.50. The next card is Dragon Necro, which is a card that is really powerful for the zombie strategy. Fortunately, it's really just $10. You put that $10 times 2 times the 15, or plus the 15 plus the 30, you have a relatively cheap deck. If my math is correct, you get it for $65 for almost everything you need. The only thing you have to do after that is just flesh it out with some more extra deck cards. Zombies are really good. You can run a stun strategy using cards like Rival of the Warlords, which does come in common quite a few times, to completely lock out your opponent. You can actually even play those hand traps because Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion did get a reprint inside of Dual Power and sits around $8 to $10, and Ash Blossom did get another reprint as well. The deck can be around $120-ish if you want to get some of those premium link monsters as well as have those hand traps inside of your deck. I think that it can fit someone's budget really well. Ultimately, zombies are a really good stun deck. Using cards like Rival of the Warlords, which has been reprinted multiple times in common like I said before, as well as Zombie World to prohibit your opponent to only summoning zombie monsters. I know, that's kind of a jerk move, seeing that the top decks don't play any zombie monsters. Also, Doom King Baladrock, your boss monster, can be pretty prohibitive to some of the meta decks. Zombies are at a pretty decent price and can be very competitive at a local and maybe even a regional level event as well. The next strategy did get a little bit more expensive, seeing that it's coming back into the format as a meta contender, but it's still pretty cheap. Trickstars, whether you're playing a pure build, a Mech Knight build, or whatever build you're trying to play, can fit in almost every person's budget. Trickstar Reincarnation might be $10 right now, but besides that, everything in the deck is relatively cheap. Droll and Lockbird got a reprint inside of the Endymion structure deck, meaning that your Droll Reincarnation combos are a lot more cheaper than ever before. After that, you have Trickstar Candina, which is about $2 to $3. Your Light Stage, which is at maximum $5, I've seen them for $2. You can get this deck for a pretty big budget. The only difference between this deck and the other decks is what you decide to fill the rest of your strategy with. Hand traps are normally the most optimal thing. The best thing about it is that hand traps are at an all-time low. Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion, Effect Veiler, there are so many to choose from that you can play inside of this deck that could be effective. If you guys want to know what are some of the best hand traps that you guys should be playing, I actually have a video for that. Go ahead and check it out. Actually, these hand traps I all mentioned can be pretty cheap. Ultimately, I think you can build a Trickstar deck at about $60 to $70, but a more competitive one, maybe in the 150th range, just depending on what link monsters you want to play as well as the staples and hand traps you're going to be including. Of course, adding up all of the low budget stuff, you're going to get a really good deal for a pretty viable deck that's been around for quite some time. One of the best decks in the format just so happens to be one of the more budget decks of the format as well. Custis, really good. And barring outside of Dingirisu, I hope I said that card's name right, it's relatively cheap. Dingirisu sits at about $30 each, and whether you decide to play one or two is strictly up to you depending on your budget. After that, all of your Orcust monsters are commons and rares. Even your extra deck cards are super rares. So yes, you're gonna have a pretty good time getting your Orcust cards. Instead of some of those more expensive options, you can play cards like Topologic Bomber Dragon, which only happens to be $5 right now. Buy that before it skyrockets in price. And you can play Longrisu, play that as a control variant. You can even play the Phantom Knight engine because the Phantom Knight cards in their lowest rarities are still relatively cheap. I'm really thinking that you can build an Orcust deck with maybe around $200 maximum, and that's probably just me over sugaring it. I want to say you can get it for cheaper. Ultimately, Orcust is one of the best decks of the format, and if you don't want to get Ultimate Rare Galteas, which I'm assuming puts it way out of your budget, you can get the lowest rarity version, have a competitive deck, and still be inside of the format. Orcust can top a YCS level event, and it's probably the deck that you should shoot for if you are trying to do so. Now, the next strategy that I'm going to unveil to you is probably the best strategy when it comes in terms of budget and competitive, because the structure deck has 3 hand traps, 3 of the best, most generic hand trap in Yu-Gi-Oh! That's Salomon Grade. Now, Salomon Grade is relatively cheap. 3 structure deck and you're pretty much there. Not really much else you have to do. Of course, you want to play even more hand traps, but cards like Effect Veiler come as common. You can get that for pennies on the dollar. The next thing about Solomon Grade is while Signet Mining does exist as a $20 card or a $20+ card at the time of making this video, you don't necessarily have to play it. There have been topping builds that opted with Pot of Desires as opposed to Signet Mining inside of the deck and have won major events. Solomon Grade is still one of the best decks of the format. It plays a stun, grindy control type deck that allows you to keep setting your Solomon Grade trap cards to your side of the field to manipulate what your opponent can and can't do. I think that Solomon Grade is an excellent budget option, sitting at about, I don't know, maybe $50 for 3 of the deck, and then maybe some other cards like Solomon Grade Sunlight Wolf that you will need for the deck. Solomon Grades are really good and really cheap and probably are the epitome of budget and competitive at the same time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what list would this be if I didn't include Dino? This wouldn't be a great list now, wouldn't it? Now, if you can so happen to find the Dino Master's Fury structure deck still in this day and age, go ahead and buy them. You're gonna get way more bang for your buck that way. But looking at singles wise, it's still not too expensive. Your soul eating monsters are at about $6 each, but after that, depending on what you want to build, that's probably the most expensive card inside of the deck. You can play a Lost World variant, which is basically 3 of the structure deck, and again, if you were lucky to actually find this for $10 each, go ahead and pick them up and you're pretty much there. Playing cards like Evil Sword Logia, Evil Sword Dolga, and generic links shouldn't be that hard to get into and aren't that expensive at all. This deck can be as cheap as about $80 and still be really competitive. We've seen this deck beat atop some regional level events. We've seen it dominate some local level events. I wouldn't say that this deck is a slouch, and I definitely would say it's very competitive and still on the budget side of things. Thank you guys so much for watching another segment of the Cali Effect. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and give it a like and let us know down below in the comment section what are some budget decks that we have missed. There are quite a few. Also, be sure to include down below in the comment section, is $200 too high for you guys? Is $200 a decent spot? What do you guys think is the best number for budget while still being competitive? Please like, comment, subscribe, but most of all, enjoy. I hope you guys are having a great day like I am.